and welcome back to a new episode of this Healthy Life podcast. I'm very excited to have Christina Heiser as a guest today. Christina is a New York-based health writer and editor living with celiac disease, and she writes a weekly newsletter, Celiac Self-Care, about navigating celiac disease and contributes to other publications, including Shape, aSweatLife, Wondermind, and when she's not working, you can find Christina traveling the world in search of the best gluten-free eats, which I love because I love doing that too. So excited to be interviewing you today, and welcome. I am very excited. And since May is Celiac Disease Awareness Month, it's a great month. I myself struggle with celiac disease. I've been celiac and gluten-free since 2012. So always like meeting other celiacs and learning tips and tricks, especially for traveling. So very excited to see what you can share with our audience today. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Erica. I'm so excited to be here and to connect with a fellow celiac as well.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. Let's talk about what your journey has been like since you've been diagnosed with celiac disease. You mentioned you got diagnosed during the pandemic, which is probably very isolating as it is. You know, it's already hard enough to go out to eat and, you know, make friends that are celiac and then throw the pandemic on top of that. That had to be quite challenging. So if you can share a little bit about your story and your journey and what that has been like for you.
Absolutely. So, like you said, it definitely was a wild experience to be diagnosed during the pandemic. I had actually struggled with digestive issues for many years throughout my time in college and throughout my 20s. I kind of just chalked it up to my body's this is how it is. I'm just bloated after I eat. I just get gassy after I eat and I'm burping. But the discomfort really started to get worse when I was in my early 30s. I started to have more severe pain. And so I went to a doctor in January of 2020. And she said, okay, like, let's go in there. Let's do an endoscopy. Let's see what's going on. And then in February 2020 is when I had the endoscopy. It turned out I actually had a peptic ulcer. So I thought, okay, this is it. Like, I have this ulcer. I'm going to treat this. I didn't think celiac or anything else. But during the endoscopy, of course, a doctor will do a biopsy of the intestines. That's part of the procedure. And so when the biopsy results came back a couple of weeks later, my doctor said, hey, you know, it actually looks like you have celiac disease from the way that your intestines look. You know, does that surprise you? Does anyone else in your family have this condition? At the time, I was the only person in my family who had celiac disease. Since then, someone else has been diagnosed. So it did surprise me. I didn't know anything about celiac disease. I didn't know that it was an autoimmune condition and that it could be genetic. So I was very surprised. And then changing my lifestyle was very difficult because by the time that I received the official diagnosis, we were into March 2020. And I live in New York City, which, of course, was really the epicenter of the pandemic here in the United States. And so going into a grocery store felt very scary because, you know, a cramped New York City grocery store, I was still learning how to read labels. I didn't want to spend too much time next to too many people. So that experience was definitely stressful. And then it was also quite isolating because I didn't even have the opportunity to meet with my doctor or with a dietitian in person. I could only do it over Zoom for that first year. And it feels a little bit more distant and a little bit more cold when you don't get that in-person interaction. And I also,
especially when you have to uphold your whole entire life and, you know, basically start your eating life over again and you don't know what's safe and what's not. And, you know, if you're having symptoms, you don't know if it's something new or if it's from the gluten or what. You have no one to really turn to.
It's true. And I didn't have any celiac friends. I didn't, you know, no one was holding events in person or anything like that. Yeah. So it wasn't until about a year later that I started volunteering with Beyond Celiac. And I'm an ambassador for them. They're a nonprofit organization. And so I did start doing some virtual events, getting to meet people that way. I will say I do live with my partner and he's very supportive. So when I was diagnosed with celiac disease, you know, very early on, he said, when we both learned how strict you had to be in terms of cooking and keeping ingredients separate, he said, you know, let's just make our whole kitchen gluten-free. That's just going to take some of the stress out of it. So I will say that, you know, in terms of my living situation, I was very lucky that I have a supportive partner.
That's great. Yeah. My partner did the same thing when I had to go gluten-free. He's like, okay. He's like, well, I'll just go gluten-free with you. And then he was going to be gluten-free at home, but if we went out, he was going to be able to eat whatever he wanted. And he actually realized that he's extremely sensitive to gluten as well. Wow. So I feel like I'm like, who's saved who, right?
Yeah.
So we're like both very strict with gluten now. Like we're both very sensitive to cross-contamination. Both of us get really similar symptoms. Interestingly, I don't get any GI symptoms, but I get all neuro issues from it. So I get like brain fog for a week and occipital neuralgia in the back of my head and just so exhausted during the day and then insomnia at night. And it's interesting because he gets a lot of the same kind of cognitive and brain fog issues. And it's the craziest thing. If I get gluten at lunch on Monday, the next Monday, it's like all the symptoms kind of go away. So it's
Wow.
good because I can kind of trace back what it was. But I'm like,
Yeah.
a week is too long. Like, it's like so
That,
miserable. And so it's like,
yeah.
it's hard. But yeah, it's great to have a supportive partner that's, able to at least have one safe place in the world, which is like our home and our kitchen. So I'm
Yes.
super strict. Like, no one's allowed to bring food in. And
Yep.
it's like my only safe place in the world.
Same.
That's great. So how has, celiac disease is obviously like a physical disease and autoimmune disease, but it can greatly affect your mental health, not only from gluten affecting your mental health and cognitive health, but also just like the struggles of like, like you said, like it's a whole new world out there. I have to read all these labels and, I can't eat anywhere and our homes are our only safe places. So what are some of the things that you experience like mental health and like lifestyle wise that have been challenging and what did you do to overcome those?
Yeah, I definitely felt a lot of anxiety, especially early on in the process, just
Mm-hmm.
learning how to navigate label reading and dining out at restaurants and things like that. I really felt, I joined a lot of online support groups, and a lot of the conversations in those groups, people will say, well, I can't ever go out to a restaurant again, or I can't travel. And so I felt almost like my life was over. Like I wouldn't be able to have a social life. I wouldn't be able to do these fun things that I used to do.
Yep.
I also went through that grieving process of, mourning the loss of a lot of my favorite foods. New York
And
City
your old
pizza and
life and how
bagels.
easy it was.
Exactly. Being able to go to a bodega or whatever it is to get
Mm-hmm.
takeout, not being able to do those things anymore. So I felt that anxiety. I really did feel that, grieving for my old life.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of, what I did to try to overcome those feelings, looking back on my situation now, I actually think that being diagnosed when I was overall had more positives than negatives because I
Mm-hmm.
really had a full year to be in this bubble at home to
Yeah.
really learn how to adapt to the gluten-free lifestyle, to really heal physically by cooking all of my meals at home. I didn't have to worry about missing out on going to restaurants with friends because no one was doing that in 2020.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
that actually to me was a positive. But I think that I've really, it's taken time, but I have learned how to advocate for myself. So if my friends are going out, I usually jump in and say, hey, do you mind if I choose the restaurant? Or,
Mm-hmm.
is it okay if I look at the menu first before we decide on a place?
Mm-hmm.
So taking that proactive step so that I can still go out with my friends and do things, or maybe suggesting, a coffee date instead of eating at a restaurant, or let's go
Mm-hmm.
for a workout class instead of going to a restaurant. So finding non-food related activities to do with friends or if someone wants to meet for work, that has been
Mm-hmm.
helpful as well. So kind of taking food out of the equation so I
Yep.
don't have to stress about that. I find that works pretty well too.
Mm-hmm. And New York is so fantastic for gluten-free restaurants. I think it's like probably my favorite city for gluten-free dining. There's so
I was
many
following your
amazing gems
travels.
there.
I was
It's
following
so
all your
good.
Instagram posts. Yeah.
I'm like, I want to go there just to eat
Yes.
because it's so good. Amazing. So speaking of traveling and eating, so we have that very much in common. I love to travel the world and do gluten-free dining guides, and it sounds like you love to travel and find safe places to eat too. So what are some tips that you can offer listeners as far as, you can still travel, you just have to do a little bit more research, but what's kind of your go-tos or methods when you're planning a trip and how you're going to eat safely?
Definitely. So I usually start with Find Me Gluten Free. I love that
Mm-hmm.
app. I find a lot of
Yep.
great restaurant recommendations there. Gluten Dude is another one that I'm subscribed to. So I feel like
Mm-hmm.
taking advantage of, the people who've already done the research. I mean, your website is a great resource as well. There's a lot of gluten-free travel bloggers and lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
bloggers out there. So if you type in any destination and gluten-free or celiac, you're bound to come across articles that people have vetted
Yep.
destinations and restaurants already. So
Yep.
doing a lot of online research first can help. I've been to Italy twice since my diagnosis, and by far the best place in the world for celiac disease.
I totally agree. It's like, when you first get diagnosed, you're like, great, I'm never going to to Italy
Yeah.
again. But I think it's actually one of the best places, and they have such a grasp of what celiac disease is and like what gluten is. And so many restaurants have separate kitchens, and there's so many dedicated gluten-free restaurants. It is a dream to eat there. And it's like, you can eat everything.
It's
So
incredible. So,
yeah.
yeah, if you can find, if you have a list of destinations that are gluten-free friendly, that, for
Mm-hmm.
me, those are my priorities of where I would want to go to vacation on vacation. Like you mentioned, New York City,
Mm-hmm.
there's great places in New York City. The West Coast is fantastic. Seattle and Portland are great. So what I'll do is I like, if I can, I like to pick a vacation based on how many gluten-free
Where you can
options
eat.
there are. I don't really like
Totally.
cooking when I'm on vacation. I know some people will pack, different items with them to cook.
Yep.
If I can avoid that while I'm away, I would like to do that. But I've
Agree.
also like gone grocery shopping too, when I've gotten somewhere and just kind of stocked the fridge with like
Yeah.
snacks and things like that. I think that can be helpful.
I think it
Um,
depends on like the destination too, right? Like when you're going to like a bigger city, you're going to have more options. You're going to be more
exactly.
experienced with it. If you're going to like, say, a ski weekend somewhere and it's like more just kind of cabins and
Hmm.
stuff and it's diners, you're probably not going to be able to eat anything too safely there. So those are more places where
Exactly.
you tend to want to have a kitchen and cook.
And I go to a lot of sporting events with my partner because he's a sports writer. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the stadiums and the different places that we go don't have any options. So
Yep.
usually what I'll do is, I'll make sandwiches for both of us, huge deli
Mm-hmm.
sandwiches, obviously checking the restrictions on what you can bring into a sports arena. But that also saves money too, because it's cheaper to buy the ingredients and make your own sandwich with you anyway. So I'll
Yeah.
do
And
that a lot.
technically, celiac disease is an ADA
Yes,
disability. So if they are not able to offer safe food, you are actually legally allowed to bring in your own food for medical
exactly.
necessity. So that's always a good reminder for listeners.
Yes.
You don't have to be starving yourself. You legally are allowed to bring in some food.
Exactly.
So,
And also the other thing I would add, if you're going somewhere internationally, it's always good to get a translation card just in
yes.
case, so you can, if there's any difficulties with communicating with the wait staff or the chef, I think that
Hmm.
can be really helpful. I learned like
Absolutely.
really simple phrases, how to say I have celiac in
Hmm.
Spanish and in Italian, and gluten free in those languages. So
Yep.
that can be helpful. But just having that as a backup in case they don't really you think they don't really understand,
Hmm.
that can be super helpful as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're planning a trip to France this summer, and Paris looks like it has fantastic gluten-free places. So
Yes.
excited. We have no glue over there. You have one in New York, but I love
Yes.
that spot and lots of great bakeries and places. But
I will
we're
send you
also
my
going to be
Paris
Oh,
recommendations.
please do. Yeah. We're
Yes.
going to be exploring a little bit of the valley, Loire Valley and Champagne. So
Oh,
there I'm a little more skittish. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start researching some places
yeah.
out there. And we're definitely going to be taking like a few French classes just to learn kind of like the basics of how to
Hmm.
order, say, express your needs. And then also planning to take a little translated allergy card just to be able to give that to places that may not be able to communicate with as easily. So just to make sure that I can eat safely. But yeah, those are great tips for traveling. And then I would say like always have snacks or find a grocery store when you get there too. Especially once you kind of learn to read the basics or labeling and be able to see like what's gluten free and what's not. A lot of countries have better labeling laws than
Such
us,
better. Yeah.
so it's like a lot easier to eat. I went to Brazil a while ago and every single piece of food there or every item in the grocery store labeled has gluten or doesn't have
Oh,
gluten. So it's just
that's
like,
the
this is a
dream.
dream. It's such a dream. And then the country is like so low gluten because they use tapioca for a lot of
Yeah.
things too, that it was like a very easy country to kind of navigate and eat in. But
That's good to
speaking of
know.
easy countries, what are some of your favorite destinations that you've found are the most gluten free, friendly, and easiest to travel and navigate?
So Italy, I would say number one for sure.
Yep.
And I've been there twice, and I've been to Milan, Florence, Rome, Parma, Bologna, Lake Como. Didn't have any issues anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Argentina. So you saying Brazil makes a lot of
Yep.
sense. I went to Argentina about 6 or so months ago. Um, so easy to eat gluten free there. So many dedicated gluten free restaurants that we didn't
Oh,
even get to
wow.
try all of them
Amazing.
in
Amazing.
Buenos Aires. Even like we found vegan gluten free food. So really a lot of great options there. Spain was really easy as well. I went to Spain last year. Barcelona, again, such a wealth of gluten-free establishments.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to London this summer, and I've heard that London is very easy to eat gluten-free as well as in
Awesome.
the entirety of the UK. So,
Awesome. Well, I'm
yeah.
looking forward to some finds there too.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, I would say for me, I think Mexico is one of the easier countries. You know, they use a lot of
Nice.
corn. A lot of their
Hmm.
food is mostly gluten free. And then Brazil was such a dream. And then yeah, I agree on Italy. Like it's just you can eat so well there. So
Yes.
we'll see
You
how
know,
France goes.
amazing. I will say too, Montreal had some good gluten-free options, and I was surprised. The best gluten-free croissants that I've ever had were in
Mm,
Montreal.
amazing. I love Montreal. It's such a
It's such a
beautiful
nice
city.
city. Yeah.
In the summer, not the
Yes.
winter. Awesome. So let's talk about some common misconceptions that people have about celiac disease. What have you heard, like myths versus like, what's true and things that just kind of you listen to and you're like, that's not true, or like you want to kind of set people straight about what are some myths?
Absolutely. It's funny. I was just talking to a celiac friend about this recently, and someone told her that they were diagnosed with celiac disease as a kid, but they grew out of it and they no longer had to be gluten free as an adult. So that was a new one. I hadn't heard that one before,
If
but
it could only be that easy, right?
right.
I can't wait to grow out of my celiac
I
disease.
know. So that one's definitely not true. It's an autoimmune disorder. It's a
Hmm.
lifelong condition. I Another myth that I've seen come up a lot is that you can eat gluten in Europe if you have
Thank
celiac
you for bringing this one
disease.
up. Yes, this one drives me
Me
crazy.
too.
If that was the case, then Italy wouldn't have such a great grasp on celiac disease and take gluten-free living so carefully. And they're actually one
Exactly.
of the countries that tests everybody for celiac disease, and they actually have a pretty high occurrence of it. So how come they have celiac disease if you can eat the wheat there? It doesn't
I
make any sense.
know.
So I hate
Yeah,
that argument.
that one annoys me. I mean, I think, the fact that it's not just a digestive disorder, like you had mentioned having brain fog and having symptoms
Hmm.
like that. It doesn't just affect your stomach. I actually just had a close family member who was diagnosed with celiac disease, and they didn't have any digestive symptoms at all. And my family was like, no, it's not celiac disease. Like
Yep.
they're not having stomach pain, not no issues going to the bathroom. They can't be celiac. And I was like, well, they're related to me pretty closely. So
So
I
good
think it
chance that
could
they
be.
are. Yeah.
So I think that's something to understand, that it affects so much more than just your digestive system,
Hmm.
and that it really is a serious condition. The
Yep.
fact that you really do have to be careful about how your food is prepared. You can't eat French fries that are fried in the same fryer as something with gluten in it. So just
Nope.
understanding how serious you have to take food preparation is something that I think people who don't have celiac disease often don't understand until they meet someone who does has the
Right.
condition.
And then they might think, oh, you're just being OCD or like a little crumb of gluten's not going to hurt you. But I'm like, no, it actually will. It'll make me super sick for a week. So
Yeah,
it's like, and I'm the one that has to live with that week, not you.
yeah,
So I'm going to take the precautions, be like, believe me, I don't like doing this. This is not fun for me. But like over time, like in the beginning when I first got diagnosed, I was like, oh, that's crazy. I'm not going to be that sensitive or that careful. And then I started, unfortunately, quickly realizing that I was
yeah,
actually that sensitive. And I'm like, oh man, like this sucks.
yeah.
But you get used to it. You start, there's nothing you can do about it. So you have to kind of just adapt and manage. And I think after you go through that mourning process, you start to, it gets easier over time.
Exactly.
So,
And then I think
and
one
then,
thing, I was going to just add
uh,
too, I think one thing that interests me, because I had a background working in the beauty industry for a few years, I do hear a lot about people having, changing their beauty products to be gluten free. And so, from my understanding, if a product is going on your lips, you should definitely be careful and
absolutely.
investigate what the ingredients are. But for the rest of your beauty routine, you don't have to change over to gluten free beauty products unless for
Hmm.
peace of mind you want to. But if it's going on your lips, you should absolutely look into it. But for me, the rest of my routine, I haven't really switched over. And I
Yeah.
do think that's sometimes people say everything has to be gluten free, but if it's not going in or around your lips, it doesn't
Hmm.
have to be. But that's something too that I've heard as well as
Yeah,
a little
I'm
bit of a
pretty strict with that.
misconception.
I do a lot of my beauty products gluten free,
Yeah.
especially like, if you're using your hands for like soap or lotions and
Yes,
then you're
that
eating
you
with
should.
them, like
You
lips,
should be, yeah.
and I was noticing I was using an eyeshadow that had gluten in it. My eyes are just
Oh
watering.
my God.
And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh. I was like, what's in this? I was like, wow, it has gluten. And I switched to something else and I'm like, oh, I'm fine now. So I'm like, it had
Yeah.
to be that. And a lot of people do have issues with their skin
Yeah.
as a gluten reaction as well, usually from ingesting it and doing it.
Yeah.
But you don't want to, I figured gluten is not something that works well for my body at all. So why have any
Yeah.
interaction with it? So I'm like, let's just get rid of it completely in all
Yeah.
areas. And I do want to add that I've been gluten by getting facials sometimes.
Oh
So
my
like, you know, like if the
gosh.
soap kind of like gets in the
Yeah.
corner of your mouth,
Yeah.
or like you're laying there, like the
Yeah.
lotion gets in. So I've had at least 2 different occasions where I got gluten getting a facial. So when I get a facial now, I'm very careful to make sure they're using 100% gluten-free
See?
products. And I have one
Yeah.
place that I go to, it's across town, but I'm like, it's a safe experience
It's
every
worth
time and they
it.
do a great facial. So I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
just going to keep going there
Yeah.
because it's, you know, not worth it to just want nice skin and then feel sick for a
Yeah.
week. So
Yeah. It's so
it's a hard world to
individual,
navigate. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Absolutely. So to someone that just got newly diagnosed, what would be kind of like the top 3 pieces of advice that you would give them as they're starting their journey and kind of navigating this new world?
Absolutely. So I definitely would say first and foremost, treat yourself with kindness, give yourself grace. It's a learning curve. And, there might be a time where you do accidentally ingest gluten. It's going to happen. There's a celiac dietitian I follow on Instagram, and she always says we live in a gluten-filled world.
Yep.
So, don't beat yourself up if that happens. That it's going to happen and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. So, really treating yourself with kindness and giving yourself that time to adapt to the new gluten free lifestyle, I think would be my number one piece of advice, because I've been in that situation where, I would get my regular blood work and my doctor would say, you're not like, it's not getting better. You must be eating gluten. And I was like so, ashamed of it and just like really beating
Yeah.
myself up that I was doing a bad job managing my celiac disease. So it's really a learning curve. Treat yourself nicely and you will
Yeah.
get to that place where you are an expert at managing your
I feel
condition.
like it took a full year for me to be like truly
Yep.
gluten free, like without being like, oh man, it's like sneaking in here, or I didn't read this label correctly, or,
Yep.
you know, a lot of times it's like, it's never going to say gluten on the package. So you have to start like dissecting like,
Yep.
you know, natural flavors and yeast and things like that. You're like, well, or like maltodextrin, like what's it sourced from? Like you have
Right.
to really start like going down a deep dive of what all these ingredients actually mean. And I think the more that happens, the less you start eating things out of a package because you're just like, everything has gluten.
Yep. It's so true. And I would
Mm-hmm.
say, secondly, don't let celiac disease hold you back. Definitely don't feel, it might take time for you to get comfortable learning how to advocate for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
at a restaurant or when you're with friends, but don't let it hold you back from those experiences that you want to have. It may take a little bit more planning on your end.
Mm-hmm.
And it does when I travel, I have to do a lot of planning beforehand, but it's definitely, it's doable. It's something you shouldn't let it hold you back from the experiences you want to have. And then I would say, lastly, find that support group for you. So now that, COVID, it's obviously still, happening in our society, but there are events happening now in
Yep.
person. There are groups that you can find. I found the New York City Celiac Meetup group in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Beyond Celiac and, I asked if I could volunteer for them and I've met people that way. So finding that group, it could be as little as one person, but just finding someone else with celiac disease or who's living the gluten-free lifestyle that you can text, you can ask them
That
questions, you can
understands
vent.
you.
Yes.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
no one understands it as much as the people who are going through it.
Mm-mm. Absolutely not. And then, so you mentioned your volunteer work with Beyond Celiac and that you've like been able to find more community through them and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about like what you're doing volunteering for them, what the charity does, and then kind of like what that experience has been
Definitely.
about?
So they're really focused on raising awareness about celiac disease and
Mm-hmm.
helping to fund a cure or treatment for celiac disease. So they have definitely partnered with quite a few companies who are doing clinical trials and things like that for various treatments that hopefully within the next 10 years will be available. I know that there are a few that are being tested right now. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the focus of their work. And then in terms of the volunteer work, the ambassador program, we have the ability to pick projects that we like to work on to help raise awareness about celiac disease. So since I'm a writer, I've written a series of articles for their websites. My articles were all focused on the mental health effects of celiac disease. And I did a series of Q&As with some of my fellow ambassadors about how celiac disease affected their mental health and what they do to prioritize their mental health. So that was really important to me. They hosted a community day last year in Connecticut. I hope that they'll do it again this year, but they had a variety of speakers within the celiac world. They had content creators, they had doctors and researchers all come together, and anyone was, able to buy tickets to this in-person event. The food was all gluten-free, which was amazing.
Such a dream.
It was the best event ever. So, but they're really focused on helping to find a treatment for celiac disease, as well as raising awareness about the condition.
Awesome. I love that. And then speaking of writing, so you also have a newsletter that you put out, Celiac Self-Care. So what kind of information do you have in there, and how can people find you and sign up for that? I think we're going to go ahead and link to it in the show notes as well, but would love to have you talk a little bit about the newsletter and what sorts of tips people can get from that.
Thank you. So I, really wanted to use my background as a health writer to help educate people about celiac disease and to help people who are, maybe newly diagnosed and who might be stressed out about the diagnosis, to make their life a little bit easier. So I do share tips and tricks that have worked for me. I took the self-care angle because I do feel like it's really important to prioritize your mental health and make sure that you're taking care of your entire self, not just the physical, because I feel like when you do get the celiac diagnosis, there's that big, focus on healing physically. And sometimes, my doctor made it sound so easy, right? Like, oh, you just have to go gluten-free and you'll be fine.
It's like, you're like, oh, I just need to cut out bread and pasta and I'll be fine. You don't realize like all the other things you're going to be cutting out with it.
Exactly. And so, and how much that can take a toll on you. So I write articles about, how to avoid cross contact when you're dining out, how to navigate dietary restrictions at work, how to travel when you have celiac disease. So just those really basic, pieces of information that someone might need. And then I also do interview people with celiac disease. I'd love to have you in my newsletter at some point.
I would love to.
and people with different health conditions. I've interviewed someone with IBS, someone with a corn allergy. I have an interview coming up with a vegan athlete. And so shedding light on other dietary restrictions and how they're similar to celiac disease, people seem to be resonating with that information as well.
Awesome. Yeah, because I feel like even with celiac disease, it's gluten, but I also feel like I'm very sensitive to corn as well and like other foods. So it's kind of just like the tip of the iceberg. You're like, well, what else is causing inflammation? What else is like not working for my body? And you really start to realize it's a lot more than just one food.
Oh yeah, I have dairy. Oh, that's gotta go next.
Yeah, it's a very, very common one with celiac, unfortunately. Thankfully, I can eat it so far, so I've taken out a lot, and I keep testing it, and I've been good. So I'm like, okay,
fingers
I'm gonna leave that one since there's ever so much else I have to take out. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Christina. If people want to find you on Instagram and your newsletter and website, how can they find you online?
So my Instagram handle is very simple. It is xtinaph. I made the handle when I was in college. I didn't know that I would be writing and editing, content about celiac disease. And then my website is ChristinaHeiser.com. I have a link to my newsletter on my website.
Awesome. And we'll go ahead and link to that in the show notes as well, so people can find you. Well, thank you so much for sharing all these amazing tips and wealth of knowledge. I'm excited for the new travel guide that you're going to be writing up from London, and look forward to following you on your content as well.
Thank you so much, Erica.
Thank you.